So, as always, this is virtual environmental education, and this is our fifth lesson, overfishing. I'm Anna. I'm the co-president of Sustainability Club.
I'm Ava, and I'm an environmental volunteer.
I'm Amanda, and I'm also an environmental volunteer.
And I'm Joseph, and I'm also one of the co-presidents of Sustainability Club.
The definition of overfishing. To overfish is to deplete the stock of fish in a body of water by too much fishing. If we wanted to use overfishing in a sentence, we could say, this part of the Mediterranean is terribly overfished.
So what is overfishing? Overfishing is when too many fish are caught and can be replaced. It results in one of the largest amounts of declines in the population of species in the oceans. Similar to overfishing, bycatch is also a serious problem where fisheries accidentally catch sea animals that they didn't try to get. So usually fisheries will go for specific populations or species of fish, and often what happens is different species of organisms in the seawater will get caught up in the nets and will be taken up with the population that they caught. And those fish or organisms that got caught in bycatch, they will die. So also around the world, 33% of fisheries are overfished, and that's extremely unsustainable. Oh, and this is a picture of what overfishing can look like. So as you see in this picture, there's so many fish, and basically a continuous amount of fishing, just like grabbing as many fish as possible from the sea will be unsustainable, because up to a certain point, if there's no more of that fish left, then they can't fish that population anymore, and the population can also go extinct, just because they don't have enough time to replenish or reproduce new fish or give birth to new fish. So the entire population can get wiped out.
History of overfishing. The first records of overfishing date back to the early 1800s, when humans would fish for blubber, which is whale fat, to use as fuel for lamps. This led to a massive decline in whale populations during this time period. The California sardine was hunted to near extinction in the 1900s. Modern fisheries have only recently, within the past 20 to 30 years, kept track of marine wildlife populations. And this means that overfishing could have been a problem a really long time ago. And this picture also supports that, because as you can see by the fact that the picture is in black and white, and like the people's clothes and all the fish there, that this picture was taken a very long time ago, and that it's sad that how overfishing has still maintained to be a bad issue over this long period of time without a true solution.
So the first cause of overfishing that we're going to get into is unsustainable fishing. So around the world, about 53% of fisheries are fully exploited and 32% are overexploited. So what that means is that 53% of fisheries being fully exploited is when they are fished to the limit. So there's a limit of how much fish you can fish between the to gather for resources. And so these 53% of these fisheries are hitting that limit each time they go fishing. Now, the 32% that are overexploited are pushing that limit, where it's actually damaging and hurting the environment more than just grabbing the fully exploited value. About the top 10 of marine fisheries account for 30% of all captures and that are fully or overexploited. And many fish species have been exploited to the point that they're endangered or facing extinction. So a common fish that we all might know is the Atlantic bluefin tuna. And it's an endangered species because of overfishing. And this is the typical kind of tuna that humans eat for like sushi and stuff like that.
Another cause of overfishing is bycatch. Bycatch results in the incidental death of species such as dolphins, sea turtles, and seabirds. And one example of this could be by incidental death. They mean fishers can be trying to catch salmon, but accidentally catch or harm dolphins instead, which wasn't the original plan. They're often caught in nets and lines left in the oceans, and then they're left to die in the seawater. And fishing methods such as long lines, trawling, and gill nets often result in bycatch, and these are left in the ocean, which can be very harmful to the fish. As we can see in the picture, it's a sea turtle caught in a net, and if no one helps this turtle, it can end up suffocating and dying.
Another cause of overfishing is harmful fishing gear. So one type of harmful fishing gear is bottom trawling. It's when large nets are dragged across the seafloor, and it can result in removing corals, which are ecosystems for fishes to thrive in. So if you look at this picture over here, this is an example of bottom trawling. So there's a huge net that's going across the seafloor, and all these fish are going into it, and that's how they catch them. But if it also takes up coral and removes it, the fish that rely on that ecosystem, the ecosystem can collapse because they rely on the coral for food, for shelter. And without that food and shelter, it's going to be impossible for them to survive because it makes them a lot easier to be preyed upon by predators. Another cause of overfishing through fishing gear is cyanide fishing, and that's basically when fishers put sodium cyanide into the water to stun the fish to make it easier to catch them. But every fish that's caught with cyanide results in almost 11 square feet of coral reef killed. Dynamite fishing is also another type of harmful fishing gear. It's when explosives get set off underwater so that the dead fish float to the surface, but this has contributed to huge destruction of coral reefs, such as those in Southeast Asia. Ghost fishing is another type of fishing gear, and it's left out at sea, and this can result in animals getting caught in it as they drift through the water. And I have a picture over here, and it looks like a crab is getting caught in this huge line, and what can happen is as they get caught, they can possibly lose a leg, and when they lose body parts, it makes life a lot harder to survive, and it makes them more makes predators have an easier shot at killing them.
So another cause of overfishing is illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. Illegal fishing is when fishing is done without the permission of the nation that regulates the laws of the water. Unreported fishing is when fishing is not reported to the relevant national authority. Unregulated fishing is when the fishing method goes against conservation and management methods of the specific nation regulating the waters.
So the first type of overfishing is growth overfishing. And growth overfishing is when younger fish are caught so that the maximum yield potential is reduced because the size, volume, and price of fish have all been reduced. How this leads to overfishing is because since you're catching small, young fish, they don't have as much meat, and you can't sell them for as high of a price. Therefore, you have to keep catching more and more of these fish to be sold so you can actually make a profit if you're one of these big fisheries. Therefore, it leads to this overfishing scenario with the constant amount of fish needing to be supplied since they're all small.
Another type of overfishing is recruitment overfishing, and it's basically when the rate of fishing has become reduced as there aren't enough fish of reproductive age to replenish the population of baby fish. And continued recruitment overfishing could lead to a fish stock to collapse or not be able to reproduce at all. And fish stocks are populations of fish that are caught together by fishers. And if the population cannot replenish itself, then we lose a lot of fish. and all those fish aren't able to continue the cycle of life in that specific area. So we lose that specific area of population from that species. So if salmon is caught in let's say the Bahamas, if it's caught in Bahamas too much, to the point that there's none left, they can't replenish the species there, and there no longer be any salmon found in the Bahamas. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Another type of overfishing is ecosystem overfishing. Ecosystem overfishing is when fishing operations disturb the ecological balance of an ecosystem in the ocean, which means predatory fish that are larger begin to decrease in population, and the population of smaller fish start to increase. And this is what causes the ecosystem balance to shift to the smaller species, and larger fish might lose their food source to overfishing as well.
Barriers to reducing overfishing. Several U.S. laws protecting overfishing, such as the Magnuson-Stevens Act, are under attack by Congress. And just so you know, that act is the main law that manages marine fisheries in U.S. federal waters. And bycatching, like what we talked about earlier, it discards excess marine life, causing them to likely die for unnecessary reasons. And it's difficult to launch universal policy to prevent overfishing, since there's so many different countries that participate in overfishing, and it makes it a lot more complicated to accomplish such a thing. And there's no common thread that specifically leads to overfishing, but it's a variety of factors that lead to it. Responses to overfishing. So overall, we need a combination of smart management policies and consumer attentiveness to have a chance to prevent overfishing. But some things that you can do is to contact your members of Congress to show support for healthy oceans and fishes. You can purchase seafood minimally and locally, and you can also do this by looking for the Marine Stewardship Council labels, and these labels check for if fish is sustainably sourced and trustworthy. You can avoid eating fish with high mercury amounts, such as tuna and swordfish, and this is also just for your personal health as well, since mercury can damage brain functions and harm the nervous system. And as a whole, we as a world need to declare marine protected areas, and we need to educate fishers on the detrimental impacts of overfishing and help them understand how to fish responsibly without sacrificing their profit. And we also need agricultural investment and reform.
So overfishing around the world, globally, there's about 80% of the world's fisheries that are overexploited. And if nothing is done about this, many species can and will go into extinction and ultimately will have an impact on us humans. This is because, as we talked about a couple lessons ago with food systems and food webs, that at the bottom of the food chain, you know, if there's a predator that eats fish and we eat that predator, well, if there's no fish in the ocean, then that predator won't eat and that predator will die. And then that will take away a food source from us as well. And we also eat fish, so that would decrease one food source for us as well. The Mediterranean Sea is also one of the most overfished seas in the world. And this is very important because the Mediterranean Sea contains a lot of sea life and organisms in it. And it's all around the European countries and parts of Africa. So it's being overexploited by those kind of countries. And it's critical that action will be taken to resolve the problem of overfishing in the Mediterranean Sea. And some ways is such as safeguarding areas, where fish grow, or maybe putting an annual fish catching limit in place in that area.
The importance of overfishing to sustainability. So, billions of people eat fish, and millions more rely on fishing for food and making money. A lot of people that live on islands can only get fish as a source of protein because there might not be any other sources of meat on the island that can be sustainably replenished. And if we lose that food source because too many people are overfishing and there's no longer enough fish to be replenished to the point that they can sustainably survive over long periods of time instead of populations going extinct, then we have a serious problem because a lot of people are going to be losing their food source and also source of income, and that can cause major problems for their families, and it can also mean that they're starving themselves, and it can result in malnutrition like we talked about in the first lesson. If people don't receive enough nutrients, it's really hard for them to survive. Decreasing amounts of fish populations due to overfishing make their income and food source unguaranteed. And if there are no fish left in the sea, then fishing industries themselves will go out of business. So it's kind of like a feedback loop where they keep on fishing, but as they keep fishing and they keep making more profit, they lose fish in the ocean until eventually there's none left.